I feel like we're just getting into a time, especially in dating, where we're getting further and further from any feedback. I can't handle any rejection. I don't want to feel the slightest bit of discomfort. What the messaging that's so important is like, get your heart broken, experience things, have rejection, have dates that don't work out, have people say I'm not into you, because all that does after is go, oh, wow, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still on this earth. I can handle this. If we think that we always have to be perfect, where did we learn this behavior? If you feel like you always have to be on, where did we learn that behavior? Who taught you that you only get love when you perform? Who taught you that you're only worth something or valid when you perform for them or when you're on? When it comes to mental health, I think we have to be cognizant of who we share these things with, but I think it really starts with, how do you share them? Are we creating a space like, hey, can I share something with you? Versus being ashamed or lying or not telling somebody, and then all of a sudden 6 months later they open your pill box and find a medication you didn't tell them about. That's just not breeding honesty. And then it really starts on a, do you accept yourself?
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, please check us out at knowcd.com. And if you like the podcast, you can subscribe to the Know OCD YouTube channel or get it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And maybe you'd see our guest on some various other things. You might have been featured on a few things, Sabrina. I don't know if that's a possibility or not, but Sabrina Zohar here with us today. You're a relationship coach, you're on TikTok, you've got podcasts. We've even sponsored a few of them, which has been very exciting for us. You've had a clothing brand, and you've shared a lot about your personal story in the realms of dating and attachment and your family. So I'm excited to have you here today. But for those who don't know you, do you want to just give a little background about yourself? That'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Of course.
So my name is Sabrina Zohar. I am dating and relationship coach. Got my podcast called The Sabrina Zohar Show. And for me, my journey really just started like I was the poster child for having anxiety and anxious attachment and repeating my patterns and not understanding that my childhood and all the things I went through really shaped me into the version that who I became in my adult life. And essentially my rock bottom was I married my father, and I married a version of exactly the same type. What I ran away from my entire life was what I ran towards. And when that left me as a shell of a human, I just was like, okay, I'm done. And that was 2018. And I dove into therapy and really started to understand my inner child, my triggers, my core beliefs, my nervous system, And fast forward 2022, I have a clothing line. It's called Software. And that was my background, right? I was like, okay, I'm in fashion and I love mental health and I like podcasting. Like, this is fun. And I was supposed to be on Shark Tank, and I prepped, and like I was, in the room on set, like, okay, Sabrina, you're next, like doing my meditation, getting ready. And 25 minutes later, they come in and say, I'm so sorry. We have to send you home. We just can't fit you on today. They did that once more, and I told them to get fucked. And I was like, don't ever call me again. And I hit rock bottom. Like, I was broke. I was single. And like everything was just going wrong. Then my dog gets sick. He passes away 2 weeks later. I was just a shell of a human. And that's when I finally realized, like, what am I doing? And so I started posting on TikTok to share about dating and these experiences and what I'm learning in therapy being very different than what we're seeing on the internet. And it just kind of took off from there. So that's a little bit more about me. And I think my real goal is like helping people that, whether it be relationship OCD, whether it be anxious attachment, whether it just be some haunting thoughts, is to be at least the poster child between, I don't personally have OCD, but my partner does, and being able to say, with the right tools and with the right techniques, like, you can move through this. It doesn't define who you are. We just have to get down to the root of it.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, and about your partner having it too, because our audience and a broader audience, even at the International OCD Foundation conference, very often wants to talk about how do you bring mental health issues into the discussion as part of dating. And I think that would be really fascinating for us to go over today, about what are some of the best ways to introduce that topic, and how do you navigate a dating life along with any kind of mental health concern.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a valid question, especially it's the same thing when we talk STIs, right? Like all these things. How do you share something that either you might be a little nervous to share or hesitant? And I think it really does start there. It really starts with an internal acceptance of, okay, if like I have like one of my clients and she has a neurological disorder. And for a long time, she had this big scarlet letter on her chest and she was just scared no one was ever going to accept her. And when she finally just started to say, like, I can't change this is who I am, she's now dating somebody who has the same disorder as her and they understand each other so much more. And so I think really off the bat, it's just an acceptance and understanding. Like if you have OCD, that doesn't mean that that's who you are. That's just something that you have, right? It's not self-identification. Then when we're talking the dating landscape, what I see is severely is like the pendulum swinging on either side of the scope. It's either somebody doesn't ever share it or people trauma dump on the first date and start going into like, so I've had depression for 15 years and it's because my father used to beat me. And you're like, I don't even know your last name. So like, this is a lot of information. And I think what we have to look at here is a couple of things. Does the mental health issue that you're having actually impede in your day-to-day aspects? So if it's something that every single day, like if I am dating somebody that's a hiker, but I have I have something with my leg and I can't walk. Well, off the bat, I'm going to be very honest of, hey, just so you know, I do have this, which means I can't do this. If that's a deal breaker, let that person tell you off the bat. But when it comes to things like I get that question all the time of like, should I talk about my OCD or my anxiety and things? And I think what we have to look at here is we have to build trust before you start to share really deep personal things, especially something that could be really detrimental to your mental health if it's in the wrong hands. Because there's going to be people that are narcissistic or manipulative that will take all of this and say, oh, perfect, let me put this in my back pocket. These are all great things I can use against this person. So, for instance, my partner didn't tell me that he had OCD until it was like a few dates in when I started to notice things and say, hey, I noticed that you get really obsessive about that. And he turned to me and said, I suffer from OCD. It's just a control and compulsive thing that I've had since I was a kid, but I really am working through that. And I was like, okay, well, can I ask you, how else can I support you? I was like, I'm curious because I care about you. Does this help or does this help? And so it was the same when it comes to my anxiety. I didn't just come out and say, by the way, I have anxious attachment style and I got daddy issues. No. We went on dates. And as I started to trust him more, I then started to share things and say, well, this came from this. And it wasn't really a secret to him to see, oh, you have anxiety. So when it comes to mental health, I think we have to be cognizant of who we share these things with. But I think it really starts with, how do you share them? Are we creating a space like, hey, can I share something with you? Here is something that was diagnosed with me 10 years ago. I take the medication for it. Not concerned about it. I just wanted to tell you to be honest. Great. Like it's just a conversation versus being ashamed or lying or not telling somebody. And then all of a sudden, 6 months later, they open your pill box and find a medication you didn't tell them about. That's just not breeding honesty. And then it really starts on do you accept yourself?
Right. It's interesting what OCD brings into the game also, because it will say, well, if I don't tell them in the first date about it, then I'm being a terrible person. And OCD will say the worst thing you could ever be is a terrible person. So you should dump all this on everyone right away and let them know. And so not only do you have potentially the advice of somebody about dating, you've got the advice from OCD, which is always the shittiest advice in the world, frankly. But you've got a lot of competing factors then that are going on between that is just fighting inside of your head.
And I'm curious clinically, because like, obviously I understand the anxious attachment, but when it comes to relationship OCD, what are ways that people could work through those loops, especially when you're new in dating and you're like, wait a minute, but this person's telling me not to say anything. How is it that somebody could actually work through that?
Well, one of the things I'll do if I'm working with somebody who has that, who's starting a relationship, is I'll say, you bring the questions to me in the therapy session and let's work on role-playing how we're going to approach that and answers before you're testing it in the relationship and seeing, well, that way didn't work and now there's another one. We're not got to go back to Tinder or whatever I was doing to find the next person, right? So I try to do that. And for people who are in a longer-term relationship, sometimes what I've even done is I've created a worry journal where we'll literally put a book on a dining room table. And if you've asked a question to your partner that you've already asked and they've given an answer to, they'll go and write the question down and then write down the answer in the book. And if it ever comes up again, they'll say, that's in the book. We've had that discussion. We're not going to repeat that again.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I've noticed like with my partner, at least how his manifests. Like, I that's the thing about OCD is it manifests in so many ways,
So many.
right?
Yeah.
It's not the traditional like, oh, you open the door 7 times before you
Right.
walked out of the house, right? And how I've noticed it manifests and like what has really worked for him is like he has a code word that when he sees himself get on a loop, he'll be like break. And he'll just sometimes say it. And I'm like, oh, and he's like, sorry, I just needed to break my loop. And I'm like, hey, whatever works. And for me, at least somebody dating somebody, right? I'll give my perspective of being on the opposite side. It helps me to understand my partner further. It's not that I'm going to judge him for what he has. I
Yeah.
understand that this is manifested from a much deeper root. But as the person on the receiving end, please let us know what helps you. Please let us know what you need. And it doesn't have to be like, you never validate me. It's like, no. We have to use the proper verbiage and saying, hey, here's what I need from you. When I'm on my loop, could you hug me? Could you tell me whatever, right? Because then at least it equips the other person so I don't feel helpless and go, I don't know if I'm making this worse or better for you, but oh my God, I can actually support you. And then we can
Yeah.
recreate safety, because I know for me and for my partner personally, we didn't have safe environments growing up, which is what caused a lot of these things. So if we can reframe the safety in our relationship and allows me to be able to facilitate that, that is, I think, where really healing in relationships can take place.
And that's why I like, if I'm doing a session with someone, if they have a partner who's willing, I love to bring them into the session as well, because I want them to learn what is an appropriate kind of, like you said, experience of safety versus what might get into a safety behavior that leads us down to actually maintaining anxiety and compulsions and OCD instead of helping to just break a cycle and move on to the next experience. And there's a fine line there for people.
I'm curious with that, just for me to know, because I find that super interesting. Is there specific behavior, or is it really like it can just change at any point? It's not like just one thing.
It can be multiple things. So here's what I like to bring into any discussion. There are 5 safety behaviors that I want people to watch out for. Number 1 is avoidance of things that might be triggering. And sometimes couples will say, oh, well, if you don't like that, then we just won't do it. Well, then the person never has the opportunity to learn that they can handle that experience because they've avoided. Number 2 is reassurance seeking. It's so easy to say, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Everything will be okay. I've never said that to any member that I work with because I don't see the future. I don't know what it's going to be like. What I say to people is, I really think you can handle it. You may not like it. It may not be comfortable, but I really believe you can handle it. So that's a message I like. And plus, you might have seen this, Sabrina, too, that the more that we get reassurance, the more we want. We build up a tolerance to it over time. And today I need yesterday's reassurance plus 1 to feel just as good as I did yesterday.
It's like a high, right? You're like that
Totally.
dopamine just keeps stacking and you're like, give it to me. It's an endless supply of needs because that need it's not a real, I'm with you.
100%. Number 3 is distraction. All of us probably have our phone within a foot of us at this point in time. It's the greatest distractor ever created in the history of the world is the phone. And if you find yourself in a situation uncomfortable, oh, I'm just going to scroll and I'm going to do things. And then I'm now able to say I'm in the situation, but I'm not actually paying any attention to it, which means I'm not learning how to handle it. I'm learning how to distract from it. Number 4 is substance use. So you've got to watch out for drugs, alcohol, and even prescribed things like benzodiazepines, which can be very much overused. And like if somebody comes into a session and we're going to do some work on some things that are difficult that day, and they say, okay, I took a benzo right before the session, I'm ready to go. I'm not going to do the work with them on that because they're going to learn what we call state-dependent learning. I can handle this as long as I've taken the medication, but it's not going to translate to when they're not in the medication state. Now, that's different for like SSRIs, antidepressants, but it's those anti-anxiety meds that we really have to pay attention to. And then the 5th one, specific to OCD, is compulsions. And most people have a wrong idea about OCD that you'll always see a compulsion, but half of compulsions are mental. And you won't see anybody doing it. They'll literally be sitting or standing there, and you have no idea in their head they're reviewing something or praying or something like that.
I've seen it with my partner. I can tell his eyes. I can see it when he has like his eyes like you could see they get watery, and I can tell, and I'm like, oh, he's on a loop. I can see he's trying to understand it. And so for me, it's so interesting because I learned so much from my partner because he
Yeah.
is the epitome of all of these things that you're describing that he's pushed through, that like for anyone listening, like you can have a beautiful life and relationship. It doesn't define you.
Right.
And the one thing that he's so huge on is his version of controlled chaos, but like he loves to put himself in very uncomfortable positions so that he can learn I could do it. So like he'll go into the extreme cold plunge, he'll do a crazy hike, he'll do these things that to him, because he's also a big man, he can, he has the stamina, but he's always trying to, like, if it makes him uncomfortable, he'll say, okay, I want to do it. I'll put my phone down and do it even more. Right. I know
Yeah.
I need to have this conversation. And I think I wanted to just highlight the importance of that behavior, because I think we have, I would be curious if you've seen the same things that I've seen. I feel like we're just getting into a time, especially in dating, where we're getting further and further from any feedback. I can't handle any rejection. I don't want to feel the slightest bit of discomfort. Even I want my participation award. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't do your work. You don't get the participation award. And what the messaging that's so important is like, get your heart broken, experience things, have rejection, have dates that don't work out, have people say I'm not into you, because all that does after is go, oh, wow, I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still on this earth. I can handle this.
Yeah. And I learned something from that too. Now, if this kind of person doesn't seem interested in me, maybe I should not keep searching out that type of person. Maybe they're not the right ones for me, right?
Yeah, exactly. 100 with that self-awareness, it's a beautiful experience. Or then we can go into the other aspect where it's the woe is me, everything's happening to me, and it's like that's a mindset shift that is really important to make. That, for a long time I had that of like, I used to call my mom and say I'm never going to find anyone, and she'd say, "Okay, you can believe what you want." And when I finally shifted it to at any second something could happen, then all of a sudden you start to get excited about every moment that's coming in your day. It's not delusion of like, okay, where is it? It's just knowing that at any second an email can come in, a match can come in, a text can come in, a connection can come in. And in that same vein, we can also lose something that quickly. And I think the important aspect is to be able to learn that tolerance of I can give and I can receive, but I can also lose, because the lose and the loss is where we learn our strength of what we can actually get through a lot more sometimes than what we really gain.
Yeah. So as we're thinking about people who have chronic conditions who might think they're already at a detriment going into a relationship because they're bringing in some baggage or something like that, how do you motivate people to look beyond that and go like, that doesn't have to be a drawback into the experience?
Usually my favorite way to do that is I'm like, first off, I'd love to know, name me somebody that doesn't have this, right? Like,
amen,
literally,
sister. Go for it. Yeah.
Like, and usually they'll send me people on social media, and it's like, yeah, that's the highlight reel. You don't know, because they'll send me someone. I'm like, I know that person personally. They have chronic anxiety.
Yeah.
We don't get to see that. So that off the bat of this, like normalizing. Then what I really love to understand is like, whose voice is that? Is that really? Do you believe at your core, I'm damaged? There's something wrong with me. I'm messed up because of this, or was that conditioning that you were taught, right? Like anytime I start to get on my loops of you're not enough, Sabrina, you're a failure, I have to stop and say, that's my dad's voice. That's not mine. I don't believe that about myself. Because then by understanding what part of me is trying to protect me, what part of me is this happening from, then I can say, oh, there's a little girl that just doesn't feel like anybody sees her. And if I can validate her, and then I can enter with the confidence of I accept myself, I love myself, and I validate myself. Well, then we have to remember, like, what's so scary about walking in, about being yourself? What do I have to lose? If I've already acknowledged that I've lost a lot in life and I'm here, and okay, so I have this disease, or I have this mental health issue, I have this condition, I have this whatever, insert blank here. Well, then I'd really be challenging and asking, if I don't believe that there's anything wrong with me because I have that, then I get to create a new version of myself that does have this with acceptance and love and compassion. Because I know so many people that have crippling diseases, that have all of these things, that still live a beautiful life because they get to choose the thoughts. The thoughts don't choose them.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think that OCD is an interesting condition because of the absolute manipulation that it will have on emotions. So even though the diagnostic manual definition says anxiety or distress, it's also shame and guilt and disgust and any other emotion that might be uncomfortable. It is such a, I say great in quotes, a great manipulator of people to get them to truly believe that they suck and that there is nothing redeeming about them whatsoever.
100%. And like, I'll be honest, I had a health issue that for a long time I was like, I have a scarlet letter. I don't talk publicly about it, but it was something. And when I really stopped to say, you know what, dude, you have this, you cannot change it. You didn't ask for it. Here we are. Then when I started to date, I was just like, hey, I'm just going to be honest. Here's what I have. Some people were like, oh my God, no, I don't want to deal with that. No worries. See you later. But then what it allowed me to do was realize how many people were accepting of me, how many people did validate that. And it reframes that, because at the end of the day, if I'm walking in and I'm ashamed and I'm embarrassed and all this, it's a story I share of a friend of mine was going out with this person in Brooklyn in New York, and they were going to a bar. And before they walked into the bar, the girl was feeling not great about herself. She said, ugh, I feel fat. I feel heavy. I don't feel like I'm confident in myself. And so when she walked in, her shoulders were slumped. She already was walking in not feeling confident. And so she went up to the bar to order, and it's New York City. Like, no bartenders are going to be coming up and having a conversation. It's a Saturday night. Get your drink and get the fuck out of my way. And it's just what it is. And so the bartender, she orders, and she comes back to the friend she was with, and she's like, that guy was such a douchebag to me. He was so rude. It's because I'm fat. And we were all looking, and everybody looked at her and was like, what are you talking about? And so then she left and she went home. But it shows you how her perception was being projected to every situation that happened versus saying, hey, this is who I am. Today, this is what I look like. If it's not where I want to be, doesn't mean I can't get there, but I accept it. I love it. I'm here for it. And anybody that doesn't accept it, no worries. Let me open the door for you and let you leave. That's what I mean by the mindset. And I know it's not easy. I would never say it was, but it's the important journey to go on, that these loops don't own you. And then for me, as somebody who dates somebody with these loops and really understands them, when I start to see the shame and blame, because my partner gets into that, especially if I say, hey, you know, you did something that hurt me, all of a sudden I can see he's on this loop, and I will stop him and say, let me preface, I told you this because I love you. And I told you this because I want our relationship to improve, not because I'm shaming and blaming you for anything, but what can I do to make you feel a little bit more secure in this partnership, that what I told you wasn't anything that you should blame yourself for. And sometimes it's him just saying, thank you for just telling me that. I really needed to hear that. And I'm like, you got it. I love you. And I just want us to grow. That way I could disarm that inner critic that's like, oh, see, here you go again. You messed up and they're going to leave. I'm never going to leave my partner for him being a human. And I need that person to know that.
Wonderful. In dating, too, it probably feels like we have to be on all of the time. But aren't there just days where we're off, and that's okay?
I sure hope so, because I am, right? Right? There's going to be days where you wake up and it's the same thing as you could wake up some days and feel like you could take on the world. And then there's other days you're like, please shut the lights off and let me hide in bed. But again, we have to look at, if we think that we always have to be perfect, where did we learn this behavior? If you feel like you always have to be on, where did we learn that behavior? Who taught you that you only get love when you perform? Who taught you that you're only worth something or valid when you perform for them or when you're on? We have a robust amount of emotions, and we as humans are very complex creatures. And I think we also have to look that if you're ingesting content, right? If you're on the internet and seeing things that shame you for not being perfect and say, oh, you have to look like this, you always have to make somebody feel good, then maybe we can say, if that doesn't make you feel good, stop ingesting it and start living in a space that makes you feel good in your own body so that you can show up in your own body feeling good.
I've talked to people who, with OCD, self-esteem issues, talk about the dating apps just feel depressing after a while. Is there something other than apps out there for dating?
Well, so here's the thing. Let's talk. This is a conversation my partner and I have all the time. And this is his advice that he gives people.
Oh, wonderful.
And he always, I'm always curious, especially coming from somebody with that. And his response will always be, oh, it makes you uncomfortable? Great, then do it.
Okay.
And he's always saying, he's like, stop trying to get out of things that make you uncomfortable. Depression is a different story. If it's obviously impacting your self-esteem, well, then what I look at here is what are you putting onto this? What is the weight that we're putting onto these dating apps? Because here's the reality. If on your cell phone, talking to a complete stranger is causing you angst, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, going out and putting yourself out there and having conversations in person, eye to eye, where someone can reject you is only going to make you feel worse. Yeah. So what I look at is like, of course, you know, you want to meet someone out in the wild. This is something that you really want to pursue. Go to Eventbrite. Start looking up at things in your community that you could do. I was big into fitness. I don't drink alcohol, so I'm not going to go to a bar. I went to workout classes. I found different yoga things. I found events that were happening. And I went very open of, let me just talk to people. Let me start conversations. I would go to different like events in the area, hike club, cooking classes, go to a farmer's market if you love to cook and see who's there on a Saturday morning that's single, right? If
Mhm.
there's a man alone or a woman alone, they're probably not partnered.
Mhm.
Start having conversations with people. But that's what I want to look at. What causes the depression and the anxiety about the dating apps? Because if it's the fact that, oh, well, all these people reject me, okay, well, then I don't think being out in the wild is necessarily going to help. Then maybe what we have to look at is, one, what weight are we putting on these apps, right? I think we're putting a lot of pressure onto something that's just another accoutrement in the world.
Mhm.
But two, what are our expectations? What is our mindset? Because to me, I met my partner on an app. So I could be totally biased and say, oh, I think they're great, but I also know the house always wins. Their job is to make money and they're not
Right.
trying to necessarily find you love, but that's on us to be a better buyer, to showcase ourselves in a way that is authentic, and to say, I'm going to have boundaries around the app. I'm not going to have notifications. I'll go on once a day just to see who matches with me. I will put parameters around this that make me feel confident and secure. And while I do that, I will also put myself out there and go out and experience new things because I drop the expectations that the outcome has to work in my favor. And
Mhm.
that's what I want to look at is like, what's the mindset, what is causing this anxiety and depression? Because it could be that that's the issue and not necessarily the apps, because you could go out and still feel that.
Yeah, there's no panacea for this, right? There's anxiety in dating. Let's just be honest, right?
It's a weird thing, right? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know who you are, you don't know who I am. We might one day be together for life, or I may never see you again.
Mhm.
There's a lot of unknown, and I would never, like, sometimes we even have to say it's not always anxious attachment. Sometimes it's just the anxiety that this person is being mixed signals, and that's totally normal. But I think a lot of people, this goes back to the I want to avoid discomfort of like, where can I go to just meet single people? And it's like, I could send you to a singles event. That doesn't mean that that's anyone in there for you.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware that there is no one place that all the people for Sabrina Zohar belong in this space and all the men that are compatible for me will be in this place. It doesn't work that way.
I remember watching a video once. Someone was doing it, and I say video because this was a long time ago, and it was actually a VHS video. I'm old, and it was a great speech, and it was a therapist talking about when he proposed to his wife, and he said, "I got down on one knee, and I looked at her, and I said, 'I can't live without you. Would you marry me?' And her reply was, 'I can live without you. I just don't want to.'" And I thought that that was just such a beautiful approach to this, that you can't force this experience, but how many people try to force it?
Ooh, I think that's the reason I think a lot of people are still single is
Yeah.
because I'll be honest with you. When I met my partner, had I been in my old ways of like needing to control
Well,
the outcome, highly anxious, not getting what I want in the moment, why is this? I don't want dating land. I want to skip to relationship land. Don't make the hard stuff. Give me the fun stuff. I would never be with my partner
Yeah.
because the person that's probably for you isn't going to come in the package and the bow that you think it's going to be in. And it takes time if to build trust, intimacy, vulnerability, transparency. And what I love about what you shared was to me the difference between are you connecting or attaching. To me, attaching is I need you. Connecting is I want you. I don't need you in my life. I can live my life, but I really want you in my life. And this is something I'm making a conscious choice of. That's a beautiful experience versus if I don't have you, I'm not going to be okay. And I need you to text me and I need this person. Otherwise, I can't go on. Well, then no person on the planet is going to satisfy that because that's a you job.
mhm.
There are people who have been in relationships, maybe even have been married, and then something happened. Yeah, it sounds like that's been you. My wife passed away, unfortunately, 2 years ago, so I've been there. And there's a lot of people with mental health who might issues who might go into those and finally have found that person, and then hold on to this notion: if that ends, I can't do that again. I'll never find another person like them. What kind of work would you do with someone in that situation?
So first off, one, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well,
But
thank you.
second of all, it would be, I mean, for me, the first aspect is like, I can validate and understand why you'd think that. I can totally hold space and say, if that's where we're at, well, then maybe we can introduce to your nervous system some contrary beliefs. Maybe we can challenge your thoughts and say, okay, well, what feels scary about that? What feels uncomfortable about that? Right? What are you scared of happening if you do let somebody in, that you're going to lose them again? But can we also maybe reframe the experience that, yes, while it's so sad, like I lost my dog who was my best friend and my everything, I would never, ever, ever give that up for a second. And it made me into the person that I am. So you had this beautiful love. And like, at least for me, my mama always taught me, I don't believe that there's one soulmate on this planet. There's too many people for there to be one singular person.
I agree.
Maybe that person was the person for now, right? Maybe that was that person for this half of my life, but that doesn't mean that for the next half, as I've grown as a person, as I've evolved and changed, that now I get to choose a different person for me that might be more in line with the version that I am today. And that's a really beautiful experience. But I will validate and acknowledge that that pain feels real, and we don't need to force it, because you're not going to believe me if I say, no, you'll find someone else. I need you to believe that and you to really understand. And it's okay if you're not there. Well, then let's maybe understand the parts of you that don't believe that.
Yeah. And then it takes risk, right? Because we have to put ourselves out there in these situations. And for people who are risk averse, this is almost therapeutic for them to have to just go and talk to someone, ask someone on a date, show up to the place that they're, walk in the door, start the conversation. All of these things are tasks that we have to do in order to be able to move forward. And yet it's a risk in the same time.
Well, it's like when we look at all these, massive multimillionaires, right? And you're like, oh my God, how'd they do it? And it's like yes, of course, some were given a silver spoon. Congratulations, let those people be. But for the average person, like even me, I have all the success right now and I did that, but I still had a company that didn't do as well prior. Like I started a first business that wasn't as successful. It's still fine, but it's not to this level. Does that mean that, oh, well, after that, I should never have risked again? It's like, but what else do I have to lose? I could stay safe, but no growth happens when I'm staying safe. If I just sit in the same spot, I'm not actually evolving. I'm not growing. I'm not becoming a better version of myself. And yes, I can lose a lot, but let me really look, what's the risk versus the reward? To me, I have more to gain than I do have to lose, because especially when I would be saying like, that's with the proper tools, right? Like if you're going out and dating and you not having somebody call you back after a date means that you're going to be having an episode that's like this manic depressive thing that you can't get out of bed because one date didn't call you back, then I don't think dating in general or starting anything would be the best idea right now. We have to build that strength. But once you understand, at the end of the day, my mama always taught me the longest relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, because there's no one that's going to be no one else is going to be there when you come in and when you leave, right? Like you might have people, but not the same people all your life. And so if we understand that I'd rather be alone than in bad company, I know that there is a risk, but I also trust myself that no matter what, I'll be okay. Then I know that I can take that risk safely and because I have my back.
OCD's nickname is the doubting disorder. It loves to instill doubt, and you might have seen this in your partner as well. How do you help manage the doubt that OCD is the third wheel sometimes in a relationship tries to throw in? How do the two of you help to manage that together to be one against the OCD?
And I'll be honest, as somebody with high anxiety, I have it too, right? Like I have helplessness.
Wait,
I have hopelessness.
You're not allowed to have. No. Yeah, all right, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. And I think that off the bat, it makes me feel less alone to go, oh, other people experience this. Oh, it's not just me. And what my partner and I have learned is when one of us, like Brene Brown has said that beautifully, that it's not 50-50, that you have to, that some days my partner knows I need his 90 because I'm at 10. And there are other days like where he is just in his doubt, and I'm the cheerleader going, if I don't, and we both stew in this doubt, okay, then we're in trouble. And so I think we really understand that there are days where you gotta rally up, you gotta show up for your partner, because when they're doubting that, like you said, I'm not gonna gaslight him and say, no, everything will be fine. What are you talking about? That's not fair. What I'll do though is validate and say, hey, I totally understand why you're doubting yourself. What other contrary thoughts can we have come in? Is there anything else that I can introduce? Hey man, can I challenge that? What are you doubt? Oh, you doubt that this is going to happen. Well, do we have facts to back that up? No. Do you doubt that this could happen? Didn't think so. So maybe we can hold on to this thought. I very lovingly and kindly try to move him in a direction, and he does the same for me. When I start spiraling, this is never going to happen, he'll stop and he'll usually pull up and go, okay, can I read you something? This was a positive review. So you want to tell me again that you don't help people? Yeah. And he just helps me to reaffirm that when we see things in that lens, that doesn't necessarily mean that's that dysregulation. That doesn't necessarily mean that is the water that we see things through. And when we let the dust settle and maybe just put some space and allow the doubts and say, okay, so I'm doubting this or I'm doubting myself. That's okay. I'm a human. I'm
Yeah.
allowed to have that moment. And instead of discrediting myself and bringing myself down and labeling that there's something wrong with me, I instead can just make space for it and say, well, I'm doubting myself for now, but that doesn't mean it's going to be forever. And we'll see how this goes tomorrow. But for today, I'm not doing as well. Okay.
The jerkiness of OCD and anxiety is to only focus on the negative and to discount all of the positive.
Always. I have one negative comment outdoes every positive.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter because you know why? It hit my core belief because I felt there's something wrong with me. And so when that happened, it was, see, they found me out. I told you they figured it out. But that just means that, that just shows me that there's more work for me to do around that and healing that versus me making it about everybody else that needs to coddle me or tell me things that are nice, because it's not always going to be that way.
Yeah. And one thing that we share in the advice you give and the advice I give is we both talk about living in the doubt and the uncertainty and allowing it to be there instead of looking at it as a negative and something that we have to get rid of, because life is uncertain. Life has doubt, and there's just no way to eliminate it. But sometimes our anxiety or our OCD says, but you have to eliminate it for everything to be okay.
Yeah, I don't like this, make it go away. And it's something I see, especially with people with high anxious attachment, is I want you to change because I'm uncomfortable. So I don't like the way you say this. So instead of me going, whoa, that triggered me. Okay, let me explore this. No, you say it differently to make me feel more comfortable. And the reality is, like, sit in that discomfort. It's okay for things to be really shitty. What we don't realize is, like, certain aspects, especially romantic relationships, that trigger that core, the dynamic that we had with our caregivers the deepest, that manifests, and sometimes it's highlighted. But that doesn't mean that you don't also feel this another way. You might just be on an automatic loop and you don't even realize that you're probably doubting yourself. You're having these moments. You're having this all day. Once we can be more self-aware, and I'm not saying be anal retentive about every thought, but once we can understand, oh, wow, when I doubt myself, I also notice my shoulders get really tense and my chest starts to tighten. Oh, these body sensations are also a cue that something's going on. It invites more curiosity as opposed to more criticism and shame.
I want to take advantage of the time with you and your expertise in the dating. So I've got a couple of questions for you specifically on that. All right.
Okay.
All right. The top tips or advice you give people with dating and how you might modify that to apply to somebody who does have some kind of chronic condition. And this could be even a physical chronic health condition, not just a mental health issue as well.
In general, the advice I have for most people right now is a couple of things. And it's a multitude, especially in the early stages of dating, which is
Sure.
One, learn to go slow. We have got to stop rushing into things because it doesn't allow you to process. It doesn't allow you to really understand your feelings, your emotions, we're so focused on being chosen that we don't also understand we get to choose people as well. So that would be my first thing. And with going slow, when you have OCD, when you have anxiety, when you have a narrative that's like, no, I need urgency. This needs to be done now. I need that safety. Well, there's the work, isn't it? That's cultivating that self-trust and learning, like, I was good before them, I'll be good after. Like, they're an addition to my life. They're not instead of. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to limit digital interactions. Stop having these fantasies, these entire relationships. You're texting for 3 weeks. You don't even know this person, everything. And then you meet them and now you can't sleep. You can't function. Why didn't they call me? You don't know these people. They are strangers, especially if you have mental health issues. If you have any of those aspects, it's not about shaming or blaming yourself. It's about taking what you have and saying, I know myself, so let me create boundaries so that I protect what's in and I can create a foundation that is solid. That to me is across the board, those major aspects. So that way you can also leave these dates, and instead of saying, how did they feel about me? I can ask, how did I feel with this person? How did my nervous system feel? And did I enjoy the questions they asked, the company? Am I chasing the spark? What am I looking for? Are my expectations realistic? We just have more space to explore ourselves. And to me, I think that's what's missing right now is we're so focused on being chosen, but we're not choosing ourselves.
Gosh, I love that question. How did I feel in the situation versus me trying to figure out how they felt about me? So important.
Every time.
So important.
Every time I dated, I'd come home and go, okay, what did they think about me? Did they like me? Were they into me? Would they call me again? Never stopping to say, but how did I feel when I was with this person? How did my nervous system feel? Wait, he didn't ask me any questions about myself. Wait a minute. He checked out the waitress. He was rude to the waitress. I don't want to see them again.
Right. Yeah. might turn out to be the most important question. How did I feel in the situation? And for some people, especially on the mental health side, who might think, well, that means I'm self-centered and selfish and everything. Hey, be selfish in these situations because you're the most important person in these situations.
And my question to them would be, who taught you that? Who taught you that taking care of yourself and asking how who taught you that makes you selfish? Because you know what? My father, who's a narcissist, used to teach me things like that and told me I was selfish for setting a boundary with him because it hurt his feelings. That is where we have to stop and go, no, I have every right. And that's me validating myself and saying, I have every right to ask myself these questions because it's important for me to get curious.
And this isn't just at the beginning of dating. This is through the process of an entire relationship, right?
100%. Yeah. If you're not, my partner always says a relationship is one giant conversation. We're constantly communicating because then resentment and all of these things breed. When you stop talking, you stop having connection, in my opinion.
Yeah. Number 2, how do people cultivate really then thriving relationships? Let's say that we've gotten through the initial piece, we're together, but how do we keep it thriving in spite of whatever it is, challenges wise, that we're facing? What are just things that we need to do? Obviously, as you've said, have the conversation, keep the communication open. What else would you add to that?
Be realistic that relationships aren't daisies and roses all the time. Your partner's going to piss you off. Your partner's going to annoy you. You're going to get triggered. What are your reactions to your emotions, right? Do you have your tools? Do you have coping mechanisms? Do you have techniques regulating things? Who's your safe space? Do you have something that you can do for yourself? It's not always just like, I need them to always make me feel good. It's like, you both are going to have needs. And remember, you're a team. So communicate, have hard conversations in the moments, but also learn how to communicate, right? Like when my partner does something, the first thing I say is, hey, can I share something with you? Because I want to make sure he's in a space to receive. I don't want to just dump on him. Then I'll start using I statements. Hey, your behavior, when that happened, I felt this and I felt dismissed. Moving forward, I would really need, if you could please say this to me, it would help me feel more protected. And then when he says something, if he says, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I look at him and say, no, I think the apology is, I'm sorry that my actions made you feel this way. And I'll call him out and he's like, oh, thank you. You're right. That's the reframe. Have the tough conversations, because then after that, I gave him the big hug and kiss and said, I've never felt more connected to you. That's intimacy. And on top of it, the one thing I will say, schedule sexy time. Don't let that part of the life. If you I schedule it, we have it. I'll send him a text of like scheduling sexy time tomorrow at 2:00, and it gets him excited. Remember that you and your partner you heal through intimacy. And when you have that time together, I've gone where we've gone 2 weeks and I feel so disconnected from him because you really heal through that. It's a beautiful practice. Don't force yourself. Don't do anything you don't want to do.
Of course.
But remember, your partner is your partner. And so when you're in a long and loving relationship, have date nights. Make sure that you are keeping that healthy aspect of the relationship alive and get to know your partner. Get curious. Just because you love them and you know them for 10 years doesn't mean you know everything about them.
And I'm glad that we've talked about sexy time. I think that's an important thing, especially with OCD, because OCD comes in many forms. So it might be a relationship OCD experience at first, but then it could be, oh, now that we're going to be intimate, contamination issues. There's bodily fluids that we're exchanging. And what if I get something on you or you get it on me and I cause something to happen? And I know I don't have anything, but what if I do and I don't know? Or all these things. That comes into play too for people with OCD.
100%. I remember my partner having those conversations with me and I was like, hey, we'll cross those bridges together. Hey, let's go get tested together. Like there are things that we could do to alleviate your partner of like, hey, you're nervous about that? Let me grab a towel. Let's have it by the bed. I'm like that. I don't like having fluids. I'm like, it's on me. It's just you understanding your partner and knowing, okay, cool. Then I'm just going to have something by the bed I can grab and clean myself off. But it's so important to be honest about like, hey, that bothers me, or hey, I need this. It's so, because your voice matters and we want to hear what you both have to say.
Might I interpret our entire conversation under the guise of, if we're not able to be honest with someone, that might not be the person for us?
In a nutshell, 100%. Because if you're not able, and we have to look too as like, if you're not being able to be honest, and it's like, cool, is that because they're not creating a safe space for you to do so, or because you're scared that saying something is going to push them away? Those are two different experiences we can explore. But I'll say at the end of the day, if it's a safety thing, if you're saying, well, if I say something, it pushes them away, or they shut down, or they don't want to hear it, they discredit me. What are we doing dating people that probably just reenact your childhood core beliefs?
Fascinating stuff. Final words of advice to those out there in the dating world that are listening today.
Yes. Hold on. I know it feels tough, and I totally understand that some days you're going to just say, fuck it, I don't want to do this. This is shitty. And that's okay. You're allowed to have moments and days where you're tired and you're exhausted and you're turned off and you don't want to do anything. But just allow yourself. Don't shame and blame. And remember who the fuck you are. Remember what you bring to the table. And remember that you also get to make a choice and that you get to choose you at the end of the day. And everybody else coming into your life is an addition to, not instead of.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Sabrina, thank you so much for being here. Let people know where they can find you out there in the interwebs.
Thank you for having me. So it's sabrinazohar.com, sabrina.zohar on TikTok or Instagram, or the Sabrina Zohar Show on Insta, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. And this has been the Get to Know OCD podcast. If you're living with OCD, guess what? You can get better. With the right treatment, you can learn to manage your symptoms and put yourself and not OCD in charge of your life. Head to knowcd.com to get connected with a highly trained therapist in the NoCD network. If you like what we've been talking about today and to keep up with the Get to Know OCD podcast and learn more about all things OCD, subscribe to NoCD on YouTube. We'll see you again in the future. Thanks for watching.